Hi there, it's Natasha and thank you so much for joining me today. We have got a DIY project to do today and I'm going to start off using my infinity dies from Hero Arts and some black fun foam. Now I have said time and time again that these are my favourite for the only reason that they are so close together, the sizes of the circles. So that is what I was looking for in my dies today. I'm going to take a couple of the dies and use a little bit of low-tech tape to stick them both together so that I can run them through my die cutting machine. Now the trick when die cutting foam is to make sure that you only run it through your die cutting machine one time, because the foam stretches a little bit as you run it through your die cutting machine, and then if you are tempted to run it back through again to get a really clean cut, you will actually instead ending up recutting the foam in a different spot. So your shape will not turn out quite as good as you were hoping. So make sure that you just run it through one time. I'm adding a little bit of adhesive to these circles and then adhering them to an acrylic block just temporarily so that I can do my stamping. Now I chose to use 4 sized circles today, but you could go ahead and just use 1 or 2 or even lots and lots of circles. So there is a whole lot of different patterns that you could use. You could use any shapes of dies that you have. Definitely go to town with this. It would be really fun. I'm going to use some VersaMark ink, which is just a sticky embossing ink. I did put down my anti-static powder bag, and that will ensure that I get as little embossing powder sticking in places that I don't want it to be as possible. So the one good thing about using the VersaMark ink is that you are actually able to see it here. Sometimes it can be really hard to see where you are stamping with it. So if you have that problem, you can always just stamp a few circles and then add some embossing powder and melt it and then add more circles on top. And that way you'll be able to see where you're stamping everything. But in real life here, I can see it really well, and actually on camera you can see it really well also. So I do have a really good idea of where I'm stamping all of my circles. I am trying to make sure I overlap them quite a bit because I know I want there to be different colors in different circles. And I'm also trying to make sure that I don't completely fill up the card front. This card front today is 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches, but I will end up cutting it down just a tiny bit at the end. And by starting off stamping my largest circle first, I can make sure that I don't run out of room for any of them, and it's easiest to fill up all the little spots with the smaller circle towards the end. So once I've got them all stamped here, I am going to add some gold embossing powder. Now you could definitely use any range of colors here. I had a picture in mind kind of what colors I wanted to use, but of course you should use what you have in your stash, and you could use any different colors here. But you can see here how good of an impression that I get when stamping with those foam circles. So this is definitely something that you can do with other shapes and things, as I said, and they are most definitely reusable. If you're using colored ink, then you just need to wipe it off really well, but there is no color transfer between the colors. It's a really good option for creating your own backgrounds and things. So this is my DIY version today. I'm going to use a heat gun to melt all of my embossing powder, and you can see that it's kind of a matte dark color when it's not embossed, and it turns nice and shiny when you know that it's all melted. So when I'm finished embossing any panel, I kind of turn it in the light to make sure that everywhere is shiny, and if there's some spots that aren't quite shiny, I will add some more heat on them to make sure that they are adequately melted. So this looks really gorgeous as is, even just like this with all of that shine, but I am going to go ahead and add some colors. The colors that I'm going to be using today are the Black Soot, Chipped Sapphire and Spun Sugar. Now I'm using my Distress Oxide ink pads, and in fact I do end up using some of the Reinkers as well. If you guys have seen some of my videos before, you will know that I use my Distress Oxides for many things. I really do love the Oxides. I do not have anywhere near the full set, and I don't need the full set. I just have a few colors that I use and love. I also have the Reinkers for them, and I actually use the Reinkers probably just as much as I use the ink pads themselves. Because obviously you actually don't have to re-ink your ink pads that often. It is great to have for that as well, but as I said, it's good for their own techniques as well. So I really enjoy using the Oxides. However, you could use anything here. You could just water down some acrylic paints. You could use some watercolor pencils. You could use watercolor paints. You could use any of the watercolor markers or there's a million things that you could use here, so don't feel restricted by the fact that I am using the Oxides. This is just what I know and I love and enjoy using. So I'm going to start off by adding some colour into some of the circles, the Spun Sugar, which is the light pink colour, and it's here that I kind of decided that instead of the black, I wanted to have the grey. So that's the Hickory Smoke in the Distress Oxide. So I'm going to add a little bit of that into the circles as well. Now there is no rhyme or reason as to where I am adding the colour. I don't usually work on a rhyme or a reason when I am card making. I am just trying to make sure that two colours won't end up next to each other in the circles. So my kind of palette for this card is going to be the pink, the grey and the dark blue. That's what I was going for anyway. And I'm just putting a really light kind of base coat on all of the circles. I'm going to come back soon and add some more colour in because I just felt like it was a little bit flat just having the one kind of all shade in the circles. So for the pink colour, I'm going to use some Abandoned Coral, and I actually just use that out of a Reinkers bottle, and that will create the darker shade of that one just because Spun Sugar is such a light colour. When I tried layering it up, it just wasn't quite enough to make a difference. With the Hickory Smoke, I end up using a little bit of the black soot just to add in that darker colour, and then with the chip Sapphire, I had actually watered it down enough that I was just able to use more of the same colour to create the dark shadow on the circle. Now, when I say shadow, I don't exactly mean shadow because there is no light source, there's no way of which the shadow should be. I'm just adding it wherever I want to. There is no, again, rhyme or reason. I'm just doing what I want to do on the card. So adding a little bit more water and then adding a darker side or top or bottom to the circles. So just having fun and just playing. I'm going to skip through some of this because by now I think you've got the gist of how I'm doing the colouring. And when I was looking at it all nice and finished, it did look really lovely and I love the shine from the gold embossing. However, I did kind of feel that the stark white background to the circles was a little bit too stark. And I must admit, I sat there for a minute wondering whether I should add some colour to it or whether that was going to ruin the direction that I was going with the card. And my daughter popped in and I asked her what she thought. And our typical 4-year-old self said, "Mummy, you always need more pink." So that's what I decided to go ahead and do. I added in a little bit of the Spun Sugar, which I had left sitting there on my acrylic block. So I did just add a really light wash of it though. So I'm going to go in and add some water. And the good thing about this is because of the heat embossing, it creates a really nice barrier between where I have already watercoloured. So I wasn't worried about pulling out any of that colour. So I've added in lots of water and then I'm going to add in a little bit of that Spun Sugar around the outside, and I definitely think this was the right decision. It did take away that really bright white from the background. Now, as for a sentiment on this card, I didn't have a sentiment in mind when I was creating it, so I was kind of thinking of what I would put on this card all along, and I knew that because of the effort and work that I'd put into the background, and I felt like it was the standout feature of the card, I didn't want to cover up too much of it, and often when I think that, my decision usually goes towards using some vellum. So I am going to have a strip of vellum, and I chose to use the sentiment that said, "On your special day." Now this is all connected up, but I didn't want it to be all connected, so I have die cut 2 of these out, and just so that I can kind of cut the words out really nicely, I'm going to get "on your" and "day" from the first die cut, and then I will go back to the second one and get out the special from the middle. And that way I can use the sentiment, but I can use it how I want it rather than exactly how it was kind of intended to be. So it's really good to take the dies and things that you have and adjust them so that you can use them and create a new look using the same dies that you have in your stash. So the other thing I did do is have some stick-it adhesive on the back of these 2 die cuts, and that just really helps me when I'm going to adhere these down because they are a pretty delicate sentiment. I wasn't sure whether I wanted to have this going horizontally or vertically, but I did end up scoring the ends of the vellum so that I wouldn't get any cracking at all. And I decided that I would have it going vertically because the sentiment looked better when it was stacked one on top of the other. Now, I did just want to mention that one of the best properties that I think the stickered adhesive has is that it is a permanent double-sided adhesive, but what sets it aside from others is that when you are putting it down, if you don't press it down really hard and you just pop it on lightly, you can definitely move it around, and it is something that you can adjust a couple of times. Then once you have your position all sorted, you are able to press down nice and hard on it and firm, and it sets it and the adhesive becomes permanent. So that is one of my favorite things about using this one. And in this case, I wanted to make sure everything was spaced evenly and looking as I wanted it to, so it worked out really well that I could just kind of gently put it down there, and then once I had all 4 words of the sentiment on, I was able to press down and have it in the right place. Now, one of the things that I do bear in mind when I'm adhering a vellum strip like this to my card is that I don't like the way that it kind of gapes out and there is often a little bow in the middle. So one thing I do to combat that is I'm going to use some double-sided tape on either end of the vellum here. Now this will go behind the card, remember. And then I am going to add these tiny little strips behind the sentiment. Now, the one tricky thing about vellum is that you can often see the adhesive through the vellum, so that's why I'm keeping these strips really nice and tiny and hiding them behind the letters, but I do think that this definitely makes a difference and stops that big gape that you often see when you add a nice big strip of something across your card. So I'm going to peel off all of the release paper, and then to make sure that it's all lined up really well, I'm just going to hold the vellum over my card, and the first part that I will do is press down on the letters to make sure it is exactly where I want it to go. Then I will hold the bottom while I fold over the top, and I'm doing that because I want it to be nice and tight, but not too tight so that it bows my card front as well. Taking off the bottom release paper, and I'm going to show you here, I'll turn the card to the side that you can see that there is no gaping and that the vellum sits nice and flush behind the letters there. So I really think that that's one of those things that you can do that just adds a little bit more to your card making. And this card would look perfect if left just here. However, you guys know me and my Nuvo drops, so I brought out my white gloss Nuvo drops, and I'm just going to add some tiny little dots onto some of the circles. Now this is completely not necessary, and you could also use just some little enamel dots or some little gems to add this as well. And then once I have finished doing the little dots around the bubbles, I did end up adding some dots above and below the sentiment of various sizes, and I think that finished it off nicely. I feel like it brings the white in from the sentiment and from the outside of the card and brings it nicely onto the card front as well. Anyhow, that was the card for today, guys. If you are interested in creating your own stamps from fun foam, I have quite a few videos on my channel now. This is definitely a technique that I love using, so I hope that you guys will give this one a go. Thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. I appreciate all of your kind words and comments and support. I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Thanks, bye!